I watched through my kitchen window as the first real blizzard of the season descended on Fairbanks, Alaska, knowing I'd need my snow machine to check on my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, before the roads became completely impassable. What I didn't know was that Brenda Hutchinson, our HOA president, was already standing on my front porch with a metal lockbox and the most self-righteous expression I'd ever seen on a human face. The knock came hard and urgent, and I jogged to the door, expecting maybe someone needed help or had an emergency. Instead, Brenda stood there in her puffy pink parka with fake fur trim, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, holding a clipboard in one hand. "Isaac Brennan?" she asked, even though she knew exactly who I was. We'd lived in Mountain View Estates for 3 years. "Brenda, what's going on? This storm is getting serious. I'm here on official HOA business." According to Section 14, subsection C of our community guidelines, recreational vehicles including snow machines cannot be operated before 9 a.m. or after 7 p.m. on weekdays, or before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. on weekends. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "Brenda, it's Thursday afternoon. It's barely 4:30. "I'm aware of the time, Mr. Brennan. However, the weather forecast indicates this storm will continue through the weekend, and I've received complaints from multiple residents about anticipated noise violations." Anticipated. Nobody's complained about anything because I haven't done anything. She pulled a sheet from her clipboard with gloved hands. "Mrs. Henderson from Lot 42 submitted a written complaint 3 hours ago stating she was concerned about excessive snow machine noise during the upcoming storm. Mr. and Mrs. Chen from Lot 17 expressed similar concerns last week." Last week? This is insane. I need to get to Mrs. Peterson's place. She's 78 and lives alone, and if the power goes out, emergency services can handle welfare checks, Mr. Brennan. "That's not your responsibility." Brenda's voice had taken on that particular tone that HOA board members seem to develop, the one that suggested she wasn't just enforcing rules but defending civilization itself. "Emergency services are going to be swamped. I'm just being a decent neighbor." "What you're being is a potential noise violator. Now, I can either confiscate your snow machine keys temporarily as a preventive measure, or I can issue you a formal citation with a $500 fine for anticipated violations. Your choice." The wind howled, throwing snow against my house hard enough to rattle the windows. I could barely see Brenda's silver Lexus SUV in my driveway through the white-out conditions. "You can't just take my property, Brenda." Actually, according to Section 22 of our bylaws, the HOA board has the authority to take reasonable preventive measures to ensure compliance with community standards. You signed these bylaws when you purchased your home. She held up the metal lockbox, which I now realized was some kind of key safe. "Your keys will be returned Monday morning at 9 a.m. when I reopen the HOA office." This is theft. This is community management. Now, are you going to surrender the keys voluntarily, or do I need to note your resistance in my report? Because that resistance could constitute grounds for additional fines. I should have slammed the door. I should have told her to get lost and called the police. But I'd been dealing with the Mountain View Estates HOA for 3 years, and I'd learned that fighting Brenda Hutchinson head-on usually resulted in more problems, not fewer. She'd put liens on people's homes for leaving Christmas lights up past January 15th. She'd fined the Robinsons $3,000 because their teenage son's truck was classified as a commercial vehicle in some obscure subsection of the parking rules. "Fine," I said, turning back into my house. My snow machine keys hung on a hook by the garage door, next to my truck keys and my spare house keys. I grabbed them, feeling my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. When I handed them over, Brenda dropped them into the lockbox with a satisfied click and spun the combination lock. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Brennan. This is really for everyone's benefit. Mrs. Peterson needs someone to check on her. I'm sure she'll be fine. The weather service says the worst of this will pass by Saturday evening." She tucked the lockbox under her arm like it was the most natural thing in the world to confiscate someone's property during a blizzard. "Brenda, this is Alaska. These storms can knock out power for days. She has a wood stove, but she needs help keeping it going. Then perhaps she should consider moving to assisted living. This community is designed for active, independent residents who can manage their own affairs without creating disturbances for their neighbors." She turned and carefully picked her way down my porch steps, clutching the railing as the wind tried to push her sideways. I watched her drive away, her Lexus's taillights disappearing into the white out within seconds. The temperature was already dropping. My phone said it was -15 and falling fast, with wind chills that would hit -40 by nightfall. My wife Sarah had taken our daughter Emma to Anchorage for a dance competition. They'd left Tuesday and weren't due back until Sunday. I'd stayed behind because I couldn't get the time off work, and honestly, watching 12-year-olds perform contemporary dance routines wasn't my idea of a great weekend. Now, I was alone in a house that was starting to feel very quiet as the storm built outside. I called Mrs. Peterson. The phone rang 8 times before she picked up. "Hello, Mrs. Peterson, it's Isaac from next door. Well, from down the street. How are you doing?" "Oh, Isaac, I'm fine, dear, just watching this snow come down. Reminds me of the winter of 1978. Now that was a storm." "Do you have enough firewood? Is your wood stove working okay?" "I think so. My son brought a cord last month, and I've been keeping the fire going since this morning when the news said the storm was coming." "Good. Listen, if you need anything, call me, okay? I'll find a way to get over there." "You're sweet to worry, but I've been through plenty of these. I'll be just fine." After we hung up, I tried to think through my options. My truck was a 4-wheel drive F-150, capable in snow but not in the drifts that would be building up. The subdivision roads weren't exactly maintained to state highway standards, and once the plows stopped running, you needed a snow machine or at least a serious 4-wheeler to get around. Mrs. Peterson lived 8 lots down from me, which didn't sound like far until you factored in wind chills that could give you frostbite in under 5 minutes, and visibility that had already dropped to maybe 20 feet. I could walk it. That was my first thought. Bundle up in my extreme cold weather gear and make the trek. But that was stupid and dangerous. People died walking between buildings in weather like this because they got disoriented and wandered off course. Even with GPS on my phone, one wrong turn in a whiteout, and I could end up lost in my own neighborhood. The smart thing would be to wait out the storm and hope Mrs. Peterson was as tough as she claimed. The right thing would be to check on her tonight, tomorrow, and however many times it took until the weather cleared, which meant I needed my snow machine keys back. I called Brenda's cell. It went straight to voicemail. "Brenda, this is Isaac Brennan. I need those keys back. This is a safety issue." "Call me back immediately." Nothing. I tried her home number. 5 rings, then her husband Kyle answered. "Kyle, it's Isaac Brennan. I need to talk to Brenda." "She's not available right now, Isaac." "Kyle, she took my snow machine keys during a blizzard. I need them back to check on an elderly neighbor." There was a pause. "I don't really get involved in HOA stuff, Isaac. That's Brenda's thing." "This isn't HOA stuff. This is her taking my property." "Like I said, that's between you and her. Maybe send an email." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen, watching the storm intensify, and realized I had no good options. Breaking into the HOA office to get my keys back would definitely result in legal problems. Trying to hot wire my own snow machine seemed both difficult and ridiculous. Calling the police felt like an overreaction, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only reasonable response. The Fairbanks Police Department non-emergency line connected me to a dispatcher who sounded extremely busy. "Madam, I need to report a theft." My HOA president took my snow machine keys. "Your snow machine keys?" "Yes. She came to my house about an hour ago and demanded I turn them over, claiming it was about noise violations. But I need the snow machine to check on an elderly neighbor during this storm." "Sir, this sounds like a civil dispute. Have you tried talking to the HOA president? She's not answering her phone." Without evidence of an actual theft or criminal intent, this is probably something you'd need to address through civil channels. You could contact an attorney about getting your property returned. In the middle of a blizzard. I understand your frustration, sir, but we're currently dealing with multiple weather-related emergencies. Unless there's an immediate threat to life or safety, we're asking residents to shelter in place and avoid unnecessary travel. What about my neighbor? What if she needs help? If you have concerns about a vulnerable person's welfare, we can send someone to do a welfare check once the storm conditions improve. Once they improve, she might need help now. Sir, we have limited resources and multiple emergencies in progress. If your neighbor is in immediate medical distress, call 911. Otherwise, the best thing everyone can do right now is stay inside and stay safe. She hung up before I could argue further. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. I checked my generator in the garage, making sure it had fuel and would be ready if the grid went down. My house was well insulated and I had a gas fireplace for backup heat, plus a generator that could run the essentials. I'd be fine. Mrs. Peterson probably had similar setups, but probably wasn't exactly good enough when you were talking about someone's grandmother, I texted Sarah. "Storm's getting bad here. HOA president took my snow machine keys. Long story." Her response came back 5 minutes later. "What? Why?" Said I might violate noise ordinances. I'm not kidding. That's insane. Can you get them back? Working on it. How's the competition? Emma's team placed third in their division. She's thrilled. Are you okay? I'm fine. House is solid, just worried about Mrs. Peterson. The widow down the street. Can someone else check on her? Not sure who else is around in this weather. Be careful, don't do anything stupid. Define stupid, I typed back, then deleted it and just sent. I won't. Love you. The afternoon bled into evening. The storm showed no signs of letting up. I ate dinner standing at the kitchen window, watching the snow pile up against the fence. My snow machine sat in the garage, a bright red Polaris that I'd bought specifically for situations like this. It could handle 4 feet of snow without breaking a sweat, could get me anywhere in the subdivision in minutes, and it was completely useless without keys. At 7:30, my power went out. The sudden silence was startling. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft whir of the heating system, the background noise of modern life, all gone in an instant. I waited a few minutes to see if it would come back on its own, then went to the garage to start the generator. It caught on the third pull, coughing to life with a reassuring rumble, and within minutes I had lights and heat again. I tried calling Mrs. Peterson. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. That could mean anything. She could be asleep. She could be in another room. She could be fine. Or she could have fallen trying to add wood to her stove. She could be unconscious from carbon monoxide if her chimney was blocked by snow. She could be hypothermic if her fire had gone out. I called Brenda again. Voicemail. I called Kyle again. No answer. I sent Brenda an email. Brenda, this is an emergency. Mrs. Peterson isn't answering her phone and the power is out. I need my snow machine keys immediately. This is a matter of safety. No response. At 8 o'clock, I made a decision. I put on my extreme cold weather gear, thermal underwear, insulated pants, a heavy parka, a balaclava, goggles, and gloves rated to -60. I dug out my emergency pack with chemical hand warmers, an emergency blanket, a flashlight, and my fully charged phone. I clipped a safety whistle to my jacket zipper. Then I stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical force, nearly knocking me backward. The temperature had dropped to -23 according to my phone, with wind chills approaching -50. Snow stung any exposed skin. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. I knew my neighborhood. I'd walked and driven these streets hundreds of times. Mrs. Peterson's house was down Mountain View Drive, 8 houses east. All I had to do was follow the street, count the driveways, and not get lost in my own subdivision. It took me 3 minutes to realize I'd made a terrible mistake. The street disappeared under the snow. I couldn't tell where the pavement ended and the yards began. The wind pushed the snow into constantly shifting drifts that changed the landscape moment by moment. I used my phone's GPS to try to navigate, but my gloves made the touchscreen nearly impossible to use, and even with the screen brightness maxed out, I could barely see it in the blowing snow. I made it past what I thought was the 3rd house before I had to admit this was suicidal. I couldn't see landmarks. I couldn't see house numbers. I couldn't even reliably see the houses themselves, just dark shapes that might have been buildings or might have been snow drifts or vehicles. The walk back to my house took twice as long as the walk away had. I nearly missed my own driveway and only recognized it because I'd left my garage light on and caught a glimpse of the familiar glow. By the time I stumbled back inside, my face was numb despite the balaclava, and my hands ached even inside insulated gloves. I was furious. Furious at Brenda for creating this situation. Furious at myself for not fighting back harder when she demanded the keys. Furious at the storm for being so impossibly, dangerously fierce. I tried Mrs. Peterson again. Still no answer. I called the police non-emergency line again. Different dispatcher. I called earlier about an elderly neighbor. I can't reach her by phone and the power's out. I'm requesting a welfare check. Sir, we're not conducting non-emergency travel right now. The conditions are too dangerous. That's my point. She's 78 and lives alone and nobody can reach her. Has she activated any emergency alerts? How would I know that? Sir, unless there's evidence of immediate medical distress, we're asking everyone to shelter in place. We'll conduct welfare checks once conditions improve. When will that be? The forecast says the storm should start breaking up by late Saturday, early Sunday. That's almost 2 days from now. I understand your concern, but we have to prioritize life-threatening emergencies. We've got accidents, people stranded in vehicles, and multiple medical calls. A welfare check on someone who hasn't requested help isn't our highest priority right now. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I forced myself to breathe slowly and think. There had to be someone else who could help. Someone else with a snow machine or emergency equipment. I scrolled through my contacts, looking for neighbors, friends, anyone who might be able to get to Mrs. Peterson's house. Tom Richardson lived 3 streets over and had a snow machine. I called him. Isaac, hell of a storm, huh? Tom, I need a favor. I need to check on Mrs. Peterson, the widow on my street, but my snow machine keys got confiscated by the HOA. What? How does that even happen? Long story. Can you get over here with your machine? Or can you check on her yourself? There was a long pause. Man, I'd love to help, but my snow machine's at my buddy's place in North Pole. I was going to pick it up next week. I've just got my truck here. Damn. Have you tried calling the police for a welfare check? They said they're too busy with emergencies. Well, I mean, if the cops aren't worried, maybe she's okay. Maybe she's just not answering because she's asleep or doesn't hear the phone. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. I tried 3 more neighbors. One didn't have a snow machine. One had a snow machine, but it was broken down. The third didn't answer. At 9 o'clock, I stood at my window and stared out at the invisible street, feeling helpless in a way I hadn't felt in years. Somewhere out there, maybe a quarter-mile away, Mrs. Peterson might need help, and I couldn't reach her because Brenda Hutchinson had decided to play HOA tyrant in the middle of a natural disaster. I spent Friday pacing my house, trying Mrs. Peterson's number every hour and watching the storm continue its assault. The power stayed off all morning, my generator running steadily. Snow had drifted halfway up my front windows. The wind screamed like something alive. At noon, my phone rang. Kyle Hutchinson. Isaac, it's Kyle. Listen, I feel bad about last night. I talked to Brenda about your situation. And she said the rules are the rules. She can't make exceptions just because of weather. Kyle, this isn't about rules. This is about someone's safety. I know, man. I get it. But you know how Brenda is about HOA stuff. It's like her entire identity is wrapped up in those bylaws. Where are my keys right now? At the HOA office. In her safe. Can you get them? I don't have the combination. And even if I did, I don't want to be in the middle of this thing. Brenda already thinks I don't support her enough with HOA business. Someone could die because of this, Kyle. Come on, that's a little dramatic, don't you think? It's just a couple days. I hung up on him. The day crawled past. The storm intensified, if anything. I watched the news, which was full of reports about the blizzard. Roads closed throughout the interior. Power outages affecting thousands. Emergency services stretched thin. Several people hospitalized for cold-related injuries. One fatality. A man who tried to walk to a store and collapsed from hypothermia 3 blocks from his apartment. Every time they mentioned casualties, I thought about Mrs. Peterson. At 3 in the afternoon, I made a decision I probably should have made the day before. I called a lawyer. Martin Foster had helped us with our house purchase 3 years ago. He was a real estate attorney with an office in Fairbanks, and while he probably wasn't who I needed, he might at least point me in the right direction. His office was closed for the storm, but he answered his cell phone. Martin, it's Isaac Brennan. We worked together on my house purchase a few years back. Isaac, what can I do for you? I explained the situation as concisely as I could. The keys, the storm, Mrs. Peterson, my inability to get help from anyone. Martin listened without interrupting, then let out a long breath. Wow, okay. So first thing, yes, this is almost certainly theft. HOA presidents don't have the authority to confiscate property without due process, regardless of what their bylaws say. The bylaws can't supersede actual law. Can I get the keys back, legally? Sure, eventually. Practically. It's Friday afternoon in a blizzard. I can't file anything until Monday at the earliest, and even then we'd need to get a court order, serve her with papers, the whole process. We're talking weeks, maybe months depending on how much she wants to fight. I don't have weeks. I don't even have days. I understand. Here's what I can tell you. If you genuinely believe your neighbor is in danger, you'd be justified in taking reasonable action to help her. That might include recovering your own property if it's been illegally confiscated. You mean breaking into the HOA office? I'm not suggesting anything illegal, Isaac. I'm just saying that in an emergency situation, The law generally recognizes necessity as a defense. If you're acting to prevent imminent harm and your actions are reasonable and proportionate to the threat, you're probably okay. Probably. Nothing's guaranteed. But Brenda doesn't have a legal right to your keys, and if someone gets hurt because she prevented you from helping them, she's the one who's going to have serious problems, not you. After I hung up, I sat with that information for a while. Breaking into the HOA office felt insane, but so did letting Mrs. Peterson sit alone and unreachable for another 2 days. The HOA office was at the front of the subdivision, near the entrance gate. It was a small building, maybe 600 square feet, that had once been the sales office when the development was first built. Brenda had commandeered it as her personal fiefdom, complete with a sign that said Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association in gold letters. I'd been inside exactly 3 times. Once when we bought the house, once to argue about a fine for having my trash cans visible from the street, and once to dispute a violation notice for having moss on my roof. It had a main office area, a small bathroom, and a back room that Brenda used for storage and records. The safe was probably in the back room. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon preparing. I found my emergency toolkit, which included a pry bar, a hammer, and various other tools that might be useful for getting into a locked building. I charged my phone fully. I found a heavy-duty backpack and loaded it with the tools, plus extra flashlights, batteries, and hand warmers. The storm was still raging at 6 p.m. when I suited up again in my extreme cold weather gear. This time, I knew what I was facing. I'd done one GPS route plan on my phone, marking the exact path from my house to the HOA office. It was roughly half a mile, all within the subdivision. I stepped out into the storm for the second time, bent nearly double against the wind. The GPS track on my phone was my lifeline, a thin blue line showing where I needed to go. I followed it step by step, checking it every 30 seconds to make sure I hadn't drifted off course. The trip took 25 minutes of brutal, exhausting struggle through snow that was sometimes knee-deep, sometimes waist-deep where it had drifted. Twice, I lost the path and had to backtrack. Once I nearly walked into a parked car that was completely buried except for a small patch of roof. But eventually, the HOA office materialized out of the white chaos, its small parking lot indistinguishable from the surrounding snow. The front door was locked, obviously. I tried the back door, also locked. The windows were all intact, but they were just standard residential windows, not anything security rated. I used the hammer to break a window on the back side of the building, away from the street where someone might possibly see despite the storm. The glass shattered with a crack that was instantly swallowed by the wind. I cleared the remaining shards from the frame, then climbed through into Brenda's storage room. It felt surreal to be breaking into an HOA office. Like I'd crossed some line from normal suburban life into something else entirely. But I was here now, so I might as well finish it. The storage room was exactly what you'd expect: filing cabinets, boxes of records, old signs and notices. I searched it quickly with my flashlight, looking for a safe. Nothing obvious. The main office was neat to the point of obsession. Brenda's desk was perfectly organized, with color-coded folders and labeled trays. A large wall calendar showed the month's HOA business in meticulous handwriting. Behind her desk, mounted to the wall, was a small gun safe. That had to be it. I examined the safe. It was a Sentry safe model, electronic lock, probably fireproof. The kind of thing you'd use to store important documents, jewelry, or apparently Snowmachine keys you'd stolen from your neighbors. I tried the obvious combinations. Brenda's birthday, which I remembered from a subdivision newsletter. Kyle's birthday, which I guessed it based on knowing he was 41. Nothing worked. I could try to pry it off the wall, but the brackets looked solid and I wasn't sure I could do it without better tools. I could try to crack it open, but that was probably beyond my capabilities. Or I could just take the whole thing. It took 15 minutes of work with the pry bar to get the mounting brackets loose from the wall. The safe was heavy, maybe 40 pounds, but manageable. I wrestled it into my backpack, which bulged awkwardly but held. I climbed back out the window, pulled my backpack through after me, and started the return journey with 40 extra pounds on my back, and a growing sense that I just made everything either much better or much worse. The walk back took 40 minutes. My legs were shaking by the end, and the extra weight made me even more unstable in the deep snow. But I made it, stumbling into my garage and slamming the door behind me like I'd just completed an Arctic expedition. I carried the safe to my basement and looked at it for a long moment. Breaking into the HOA office was one thing. Breaking open Brenda's safe was another level of escalation, but I'd come this far. I spent an hour trying to crack it with various tools from my workshop. Hammer, chisel, pry bar, drill. The safe was tougher than I expected, designed to resist exactly this kind of amateur attack. I finally gave up on finesse and just beat on the electronic lock with a sledgehammer until something inside cracked and the door popped open slightly. Inside, I found the lockbox containing my keys. I also found approximately $3,000 in cash, various HOA documents, and what looked like the deed to Brenda's house. I took my keys and left everything else untouched, then photographed the safe's contents with my phone for documentation. It was nearly midnight when I finally had my Snowmachine keys back in my hand. I was exhausted, covered in sweat despite the cold, and pretty sure I'd committed at least 2 crimes. But I had what I needed. The storm was still going strong when I rolled my Snowmachine out of the garage at 12:30 a.m. Saturday morning. The machine started immediately, its engine roar sounding impossibly loud after days of relative quiet. I let it warm up for a minute, then headed out into the storm. The difference between walking and riding was night and day. The Snowmachine cut through the drifts like they weren't there, its headlight illuminating the swirling snow ahead. I followed Mountain View Drive by memory and GPS, counting houses until I reached Mrs. Peterson's place. Her house was dark. No lights in any window, no smoke from the chimney that I could see through the storm. I parked the Snowmachine and waded through the snow to her front door, my stomach tight with worry. I knocked hard. No answer. I tried the doorknob. Locked. I knocked again, harder, calling out, "Mrs. Peterson, it's Isaac Brennan. Are you okay?" Nothing. I was about to break another window when I heard a faint sound from inside. Movement, then a voice. "Who's there?" Relief flooded through me. "It's Isaac, Mrs. Peterson, from down the street." "Are you all right?" The door opened a crack and Mrs. Peterson's face appeared, barely visible in the darkness. "Isaac, what are you doing out in this weather? Checking on you. You haven't answered your phone since yesterday. Can I come in?" She opened the door wider, and I stepped into a house that was dark and cold, much colder than it should have been. Mrs. Peterson was wearing what looked like every piece of clothing she owned, layered like an Arctic explorer. "My phone's been dead since the power went out," she explained. "I couldn't figure out how to charge it with the generator, and I didn't want to waste the generator fuel just for a phone. How's your heat? Your wood stove?" "Well, that's been a bit of a problem." She led me to her living room where a wood stove sat cold and dark. "The fire went out yesterday evening and I couldn't get it started again. I think the wood might be damp or maybe the chimney's blocked. I've been staying in bed mostly, trying to keep warm." "How long has it been since you had heat?" "Since about 8 last night. But I'm fine, really." I've got plenty of blankets, and I found some old chemical hand warmers in my emergency supplies. I checked the temperature on my phone. It was 51 degrees in her house. Not immediately dangerous, but definitely not safe for someone her age over an extended period. Let me look at your wood stove. I spent the next hour getting Mrs. Peterson's heat working again. The problem was indeed a blocked chimney. Snow and ice had accumulated at the top and choked off the draft. I had to go outside, climb a ladder I found in her garage, and clear the blockage with a long pole, all while the storm tried to blow me off the roof. Once the chimney was clear, I got a fire started with some dry kindling I found and some chemical fire starters from my emergency pack. Within 30 minutes, warmth was spreading through the house again. Mrs. Peterson sat near the stove, wrapped in blankets, her color already starting to improve. "You shouldn't have come out in this," she said. "It's too dangerous. I should have come sooner. I tried yesterday, but I couldn't get here. Because of the storm. Because my HOA president took my Snowmachine keys." She looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. She what? I explained the whole ridiculous situation while I helped her organize her firewood and made sure she had everything she needed. Mrs. Peterson's expression moved from confusion to disbelief to anger. "That woman came to my door last month," she said finally. "She tried to tell me I needed to paint my shutters because they were the wrong color according to some HOA standard. I told her I was 78 years old and I'd paint my shutters whenever I damn well pleased. She threatened to fine me. Did she? She sent me a letter. I threw it away. What are they going to do, take my house? I've owned it outright for 30 years. I smiled despite the situation. I wish I'd been there to see you tell her off. She's one of those people who needs to control everything because she doesn't have anything important in her life. I've known 100 Brendas. They're all the same. Before I left, I made sure Mrs. Peterson had my number written down in 3 places, showed her how to charge her phone using her generator, and confirmed she had at least a week's worth of food and water. I also gave her one of my emergency radios, a hand crank model that didn't need batteries. "Call me if you need anything," I said. "I can be here in 5 minutes now." "Thank you, Isaac. You're a good man." The ride back to my house took 3 minutes. I put the snow machine away, went inside, and collapsed on my couch with exhaustion that went bone deep. It was nearly 3 a.m. I'd been awake for almost 24 hours. I was asleep within minutes. Saturday morning arrived with my phone ringing at 7:45 a.m. I fumbled for it, still half asleep. "Hello, Isaac Brennan," a woman's voice, sharp and angry. "Who is this?" "This is Brenda Hutchinson. I just got to the HOA office and found it broken into. My safe is missing, and I'm guessing you know something about that." I sat up, suddenly very awake. "I know you stole my property and I took it back. You broke into the HOA office. That's a felony. You stole my snow machine keys. That's also a felony. I was enforcing HOA bylaws. Your bylaws don't give you the right to commit theft, Brenda. I talked to a lawyer. You had no legal authority to take my keys. You broke my window. You stole my safe. I recovered my property. Your safe is in my basement, completely intact except for the damaged lock. Everything inside it is still there except my keys. You can have it back anytime you want, along with a bill for my broken window." There was a long silence. "The police are on their way. I called them as soon as I saw the break-in." "Good. I'll be happy to explain to them how you took my property during a blizzard and prevented me from helping an elderly neighbor who had no heat." "That's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened. Mrs. Peterson spent 24 hours in a 50-degree house because her wood stove failed and I couldn't get to her because you took my keys. If something had happened to her, you'd be looking at a lot more than a property dispute." Another silence, longer this time. She's okay. No thanks to you. I got her heat working again last night. How? You didn't have your keys. I got them back. By committing a crime, Brenda, here's what's going to happen. You're going to return my keys, which you had no right to take. I'm going to return your safe. We're going to call this even, and you're never going to pull something like this again. Or we can involve the police and lawyers and spend the next year fighting in court, and I'll make absolutely sure everyone in this subdivision knows exactly what you did. Your choice. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Fine, bring me my safe. You can pick it up when the storm clears. I'm not going anywhere in this weather. The storm's breaking up. The forecast says it'll be clear by this afternoon. Then you can come get it this afternoon. She hung up without saying goodbye. I made coffee and tried to figure out how much trouble I was actually in. Breaking and entering was serious. Theft, even theft of something that was already stolen from you, was serious. But I also knew that Brenda's actions were indefensible. And if it came down to a legal fight, I had a pretty good case for necessity and defense of others. The police showed up at 9:30 a.m. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking tired from what had probably been a very long few days of storm-related calls. "Isaac Brennan?" the male officer asked. "That's me." "I'm Officer Martinez. This is Officer Chen. We got a call from Brenda Hutchinson about a break-in at the HOA office. She seems to think you're involved." "I am involved. Come in, I'll explain." I told them everything. The keys, the storm, Mrs. Peterson, the break-in, everything. I showed them the safe in my basement. I showed them the photographs I'd taken of the contents. I gave them Martin Foster's contact information. Officer Chen took notes while Officer Martinez examined the safe. When I finished talking, they looked at each other in a way that suggested they'd been doing this long enough to recognize a situation that was complicated but not exactly criminal. "So you broke into the HOA office to recover property that you say was illegally taken from you?" Martinez asked. "Yes." "And you broke Mrs. Hutchinson's safe open?" "Yes. I tried not to damage it, but I needed my keys." "Did you take anything else?" "No. Everything else is still in there." "You can check." Chen crouched down to look at the safe's contents. "There's a lot of cash in here." "I know. I didn't touch it." Martinez pulled out his radio and had a brief, quiet conversation with someone. When he finished, he turned back to me. "We're going to need to talk to Mrs. Peterson to confirm your story about checking on her. She's at her house. I can give you the address. We know where she lives. Mrs. Hutchinson mentioned her in her complaint." They left to go talk to Mrs. Peterson, telling me not to go anywhere. I waited, drinking coffee and watching out the window as the storm finally started to break up. The snow was still falling, but lighter now, and the wind had dropped significantly. They came back 40 minutes later. Martinez looked almost amused. "Mrs. Peterson confirmed your story. She also said some pretty unflattering things about Mrs. Hutchinson and the HOA in general." "So what happens now? Honestly, this is a mess. You did commit breaking and entering, but Mrs. Hutchinson also appears to have illegally confiscated your property. Mrs. Peterson supports your version of events and says you may have saved her from serious cold-related injury. The DA's probably not going to want to prosecute this." "What about Brenda? Is she going to face charges?" Martinez shrugged. "We're going to write up a report. Whether anyone gets charged is up to the district attorney. But if I were you, I'd document everything, keep all your records, and probably talk to a lawyer about a formal complaint against the HOA." After they left, I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering anxiety. I wasn't arrested, which was good. But this clearly wasn't over. The storm cleared by early Saturday afternoon. leaving behind a transformed landscape of snow drifts and sculptured white surfaces that gleamed in the sudden sunshine. My phone started buzzing with messages as people's internet and cell service came back online. Sarah called. "I saw the news about the storm. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. It's been an interesting couple days." "What happened with the HOA?" I gave her the short version. Her reaction was predictable. "She stole your keys during a blizzard." "Isaac, that's insane." "I know." "What are you going to do?" "Honestly, I'm not sure yet, but I think we need to talk about this HOA situation when you get home. This is getting out of control." Sunday morning, Brenda showed up at my door with Kyle trailing behind her, looking uncomfortable. The temperature had risen to a balmy -5, and the sun was bright enough to make the snow field outside almost blinding. "I'm here for my safe," Brenda said without preamble. "Come in." I led them to the basement, where the safe sat exactly where I'd left it. Brenda examined it with an expression of barely controlled fury, then checked the contents. "The lock is destroyed." "I needed to get it open. Send me a bill, I'll pay for a replacement." "This whole thing is your fault, you know. If you just followed the rules." "Brenda, stop." Kyle's voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop." She turned to look at her husband. "What? This isn't about rules. This is about you taking things too far, again. You took this man's property during a storm and an old woman almost froze because of it. The police told me what happened. This is serious." "I was doing my job as HOA president." "Your job doesn't include theft. I talked to our lawyer yesterday. He says you exposed us to massive liability. If Mrs. Peterson had died, we could have been held responsible. She didn't die. She's fine." "Because Isaac broke into the HOA office and got his keys back." Kyle's voice was rising now. "Brenda, this is ridiculous. This whole HOA obsession is ridiculous. You fine people for having their trash cans out 12 hours too long. You cite people for having the wrong mailbox. You drove the Thompsons out of the neighborhood with your constant harassment. I'm enforcing the community standards that everyone agreed to." Nobody agreed to live in a dictatorship. They argued for another 5 minutes while I stood there awkwardly. Finally, Kyle picked up the safe and carried it toward the stairs. Brenda followed, still muttering about bylaws and community standards. At my front door, she turned back. "This isn't over. I'm bringing formal HOA charges against you for multiple violations. Bring whatever charges you want, Brenda. I'll see you at the hearing." After they left, I called Martin Foster again. "I think I'm going to need a lawyer after all." The next 2 weeks were a blur of documentation, emails, and preparation. Brenda did indeed file formal HOA charges against me, claiming I'd violated noise ordinances, damaged HOA property, and conducted myself in a manner detrimental to the community. The hearing was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in late January. Martin helped me prepare. We gathered statements from Mrs. Peterson, photographs of my recovered safe, police reports, and documentation of every interaction I'd had with Brenda. We also started looking into Brenda's conduct as HOA president, and what we found was disturbing. Over the past 3 years, Brenda had issued over 200 violation notices to homeowners in our subdivision of 62 houses. She'd put liens on 4 properties for unpaid fines. She'd initiated lawsuits against 3 homeowners. And she'd apparently been skimming money from HOA dues to pay for personal expenses, based on some financial records that a sympathetic board member leaked to us. The hearing was held in the community center, a larger building near the subdivision entrance. Nearly 40 homeowners showed up, which was unprecedented. Normally, these things drew maybe 5 people. Brenda sat at a table at the front with 2 other board members, Linda Morrison and Paul Chen. She dressed formally in a navy pantsuit and had her hair pulled back in her trademark severe style. I sat with Martin at a separate table, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, trying to look like a reasonable person rather than someone who'd recently broken into an HOA office. Brenda opened by reading the charges against me in a tone that suggested I'd committed war crimes rather than recovered stolen property. When she finished, she looked at me expectantly. "Mr. Brennan, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Martin stood. "If I may, Mrs. Hutchinson, I'd like to present some context for Mr. Brennan's actions." For the next 30 minutes, Martin walked through everything that had happened. He had Mrs. Peterson give a statement via video call, explaining how I'd potentially saved her from hypothermia. He presented the police reports, showing that no charges had been filed against me. He showed photographs of the lockbox containing my keys, which Brenda had never had any legal right to confiscate. Then he pivoted to Brenda's conduct as HOA president. "While we're discussing violations of community standards," Martin said, "I'd like to address some concerns about how this HOA has been managed." He laid out the excessive fines, the harassment of homeowners, and most damningly, the financial irregularities. He presented bank statements showing that Brenda had written HOA checks to herself for administrative expenses, totaling nearly $12,000 over 2 years, expenses that weren't documented or approved by the board. Brenda's face went from red to white. Those were legitimate expenses. "Then you'll have receipts and documentation. I don't have to explain myself to you. This hearing is about Mr. Brennan's violations, not my conduct as president." Paul Chen cleared his throat. "Actually, Brenda, I think we do need to discuss this. I had no idea you'd been writing checks to yourself. That's not something that was ever approved by the board. I needed compensation for the time I was putting into HOA management." "The president position is volunteer," Linda Morrison said quietly. "It's always been volunteer. That's in the bylaws." The hearing devolved into chaos after that. Homeowners started standing up and voicing their own complaints about Brenda's management. Stories poured out about unreasonable fines, harassment, threats of lawsuits, and arbitrary enforcement of rules that seemed designed to target people Brenda didn't like. One woman stood up and tearfully described how Brenda had fined her $500 for having a memorial garden for her deceased husband, because it wasn't an approved landscaping feature. A man described being threatened with a lien on his house because his teenage son's truck was allegedly a commercial vehicle. Even though it was just a regular pickup truck, the kid drove to school. The Robinsons, whom I'd mentioned earlier, described months of harassment that had finally driven them to sell their house at a loss and move out of the subdivision. Through it all, Brenda sat at the front table with an expression that cycled between defiance, anger, and something that might have been fear. She tried to regain control several times, but nobody was listening anymore. Finally, Paul Chen stood up and raised his hands for quiet. "Okay, everyone, please. This isn't productive. Here's what I propose. We table the charges against Mr. Brennan pending a full investigation into HOA finances and management practices. We'll need to bring in an accountant to audit our books, and we should probably consult with a lawyer about proper procedures going forward. And I think we need to have a serious discussion about HOA leadership." "Are you calling for my resignation?" Brenda demanded. "I'm saying we need to step back and evaluate how things are being run. If there are financial irregularities, that's serious. If homeowners feel harassed and targeted, that's serious too." "Fine." Brenda stood up abruptly, grabbing her clipboard and purse. "Fine. You all want to turn this place into a free-for-all where nobody follows any rules. Go ahead. I resign. effective immediately. Good luck running this community without me." She stormed out, Kyle following after with an apologetic look at the assembled homeowners. The meeting continued for another hour, with Paul Chen and Linda Morrison trying to bring some order to the proceedings. They called for a special election to replace Brenda and fill out the board. They approved hiring an accountant to audit the HOA finances. And they unanimously voted to dismiss all charges against me. When it was over, at least a dozen people came up to thank me or shake my hand. Mrs. Peterson was there, having gotten a ride from her son, and she gave me a fierce hug. "You stood up to her," she said. "Someone finally stood up to her." It was about time. The weeks following the hearing brought a kind of peace to Mountain View Estates that I don't think had existed since Brenda took over as HOA president. The financial audit revealed that she'd taken nearly $15,000 in unauthorized administrative fees over 3 years. The board voted unanimously to demand repayment and filed a complaint with the police. In early February, Brenda was arrested and charged with theft and embezzlement. The amounts weren't huge, but the crime was clear. She made bail immediately, but Kyle moved out the same week, filing for separation. The neighborhood gossip network suggested he'd been looking for an excuse to leave for years. The new HOA board, led by Paul Chen as president, immediately started rolling back the more draconian policies. Reasonable enforcement replaced arbitrary harassment. The focus shifted from punishment to actual community building. They organized a neighborhood cleanup day, started a community garden, and put together an emergency contact network so people could check on each other during future storms. I paid to replace Brenda's safe lock, which cost me $247. I considered it a bargain. Mrs. Peterson and I became good friends after the storm. I checked on her regularly, helped with various maintenance tasks around her house, and she taught me how to make the best apple pie I'd ever tasted. She told stories about Alaska in the old days, before subdivisions and HOAs existed, when people just helped each other because that's what neighbors did. Sarah and Emma came home from Anchorage to find me something of a neighborhood celebrity, which Emma found hilarious and Sarah found concerning. "You broke into a building," she reminded me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "You could have been arrested." "I know, but what else was I supposed to do?" "I don't know. But promise me you won't make a habit of breaking and entering, okay? I promise." Once was more than enough. In March, Brenda's criminal case was resolved with a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to theft, received 2 years probation, and was ordered to repay the $15,000 plus court costs. The judge also banned her from serving in any HOA leadership position for 10 years, which everyone agreed was the most important part of the sentence. Brenda and Kyle's house went up for sale in April. They listed it slightly below market value, apparently eager to get out quickly. A young couple with 2 kids bought it, and they seemed friendly and normal, which was all anyone could ask for. The story of what happened that winter became subdivision legend. The Great Snowmachine key theft is what people called it, and it got retold at gatherings and barbecues with embellishments and exaggerations. In some versions, I'd rappelled down the HOA office building like an action hero. In others, Mrs. Peterson had been hours from death when I found her, which wasn't true but made for a better story. The truth was simpler and scarier. Someone in a position of minor authority had let that authority go to her head, had prioritized rules over people, and had nearly caused a tragedy. It was a reminder that HOAs, for all their stated goals about maintaining property values and community standards, were only as good as the people running them. On a Saturday in late May, the subdivision held its first annual community cookout, organized by the new HOA board. Nearly everyone showed up. Kids played in the park. Adults stood around grills and talked about gardening, fishing, and the upcoming summer. My snow machine sat in my garage, keys hanging safely on their hook, ready for next winter. Mrs. Peterson brought her famous apple pie. Paul Chen brought enough salmon to feed 40 people. The Robinsons, who'd moved away, actually drove up from their new place to visit and were shocked by how much the atmosphere had changed. "It's like a completely different neighborhood, Mrs. Robinson said, looking around at people laughing and talking. "When we lived here, everyone was scared to even decorate for holidays because Brenda might find them." "Things change," I said. "Sometimes it just takes someone pushing back." "Thank you for pushing back," she said. "Seriously. What you did that night took courage." I didn't feel particularly courageous. I'd just been trying to help a neighbor and had gotten stubborn when someone tried to stop me. But if that counted as courage, I'd take it. As the sun set over the Alaska range, painting the still snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold, I stood with Sarah and Emma and watched our neighbors enjoy themselves without fear of violation notices or arbitrary fines. This was what a community was supposed to be. People looking out for each other, helping when needed, and giving each other the grace to live their lives without constant surveillance and judgment. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Peterson. "Thank you again for everything. Your pie is in the oven." I smiled and texted back. "I'll be right over." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Another pie lesson. Someone has to learn her secrets before she decides to take them to the grave. You know she's going to outlive us all, right? That woman is indestructible." She probably would. Mrs. Peterson had survived 78 Alaska winters, a broken wood stove in a blizzard, and Brenda Hutchinson's HOA reign of terror. If that didn't prove her toughness, nothing would. As we walked home from the cookout, Emma between us holding both our hands, I thought about how close things had come to going wrong. If I'd waited, if I'd trusted the system, if I'd been more reasonable and less stubborn, Mrs. Peterson might have been seriously injured or worse. And Brenda would have continued her petty tyranny unchecked, making life miserable for everyone in the subdivision. Sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the legal thing or the safe thing or the reasonable thing. Sometimes it was just the necessary thing, and you did it and dealt with the consequences later. The snow machine keys hung on their hook by the garage door, right where they belonged. Next winter, if another storm came, I'd be ready. And if anyone tried to take my keys again, well, they'd learn what happened the last time someone tried that. But I didn't think anyone would. The new HOA board understood that rules existed to serve the community, not the other way around. They understood that people's safety mattered more than quiet hours and noise ordinances. They understood that being a good neighbor meant helping each other, not looking for violations to punish. It was a simple lesson, but apparently one that some people needed to learn the hard way. The subdivision settled into a comfortable routine as spring turned to summer. Gardens grew. Kids rode bikes. People waved to each other. The HOA still existed, still maintained common areas and enforced basic standards, but without the vindictive edge that had defined Brenda's tenure. In June, I ran into Kyle Hutchinson at the grocery store. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him, less stressed, with color in his face and something resembling happiness in his eyes. "Isaac, hey." "Kyle, how are you doing?" "Good, really good actually. The divorce is almost final. I got an apartment in North Pole closer to work. It's small, but it's mine. I'm glad you're doing okay. I should have left years ago. I just kept making excuses, telling myself it wasn't that bad." But watching her take your keys during that storm, seeing how obsessed she'd become with controlling everyone, I realized I'd been living with that same control for 15 years. It was either leave or lose myself completely. That's not an easy realization. No, but necessary. He shifted his shopping basket to his other hand. Look, I'm sorry about everything that happened. I should have stood up to her sooner. Should have stopped her from taking your keys. But I was just so used to avoiding conflict, you know. I get it. You're not responsible for her choices. Still, if Mrs. Peterson had been hurt, I would have felt guilty for the rest of my life. He met my eyes. Thank you for doing what needed to be done. I know it cost you. It worked out. Not everyone would have taken that risk. You're a good man, Isaac. After he walked away, I thought about all the ways that night could have gone differently. The number of decision points where I could have chosen differently. If I'd been less stubborn, less willing to break rules, less certain that I was right. But I had been certain. Sometimes you just know, down in your bones, that something is wrong and needs to be fixed. That a rule being followed is causing more harm than good. That authority being exercised is being abused. And sometimes you have to trust that certainty, even when it leads you to break into HOA offices and sledgehammer open safes in your basement at midnight. The summer passed quietly. Emma's dance team did well in regional competitions. Sarah got a promotion at work. I installed a new shed in the backyard without getting a single violation notice, which felt like a minor miracle. Mrs. Peterson's garden produced enough vegetables to feed half the subdivision, and she gave away bags of tomatoes and zucchini to anyone who stopped by. In August, the HOA held a special meeting to discuss winterization and emergency preparedness. Paul Chen had put together a comprehensive plan for the next major storm, including a buddy system to check on elderly residents, a neighborhood emergency contact list, and designated Snowmachine owners who could help with transportation if needed. The goal, Paul explained to the assembled homeowners, is to make sure what happened to Mrs. Peterson doesn't happen to anyone else. We need to look out for each other, especially during emergencies. Everyone agreed. It seemed obvious now, so obvious that it was hard to understand how Brenda had lost sight of something so fundamental. But power corrupts, even the tiny power of an HOA presidency, and some people were more susceptible to that corruption than others. As fall arrived and the days grew shorter, I started preparing for winter again. I serviced my snow machine, checked my generator, stocked up on emergency supplies. But this time I did it with the confidence that if something went wrong, I wouldn't be fighting against my own HOA to help my neighbors. On the first day of snow in September, Emma ran outside to catch flakes on her tongue while Sarah and I watched from the porch. "Think you'll need your snow machine this winter?" Sarah asked. "Probably, but hopefully not for any dramatic rescues. I don't know. You seem to enjoy your adventure in a weird way." "I did not enjoy breaking into a building in a blizzard. But you'd do it again if you had to." I thought about that. "Yeah, I would." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "That's what I love about you. You're stubborn and principled, and you don't back down when something matters. Those are the same qualities that drive you crazy the rest of the time." True. But that night, they were exactly what was needed. Emma came running back, covered in snowflakes and grinning. "Dad, can we go snow machining this winter?" "Like a lot." "Sure, kiddo, whenever you want." "Cool. And we won't get in trouble with the HOA." "Nope. New HOA, new rules. Or actually, same rules but applied reasonably." "I don't really get what happened with all that," Emma said. "But Mom says you were a hero." "I wasn't a hero. I was just a neighbor helping a neighbor." "That's what heroes are, Dad." Out of the mouths of 12-year-olds. Maybe she was right. Maybe heroism wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Maybe it was just about doing the right thing when someone needed help, even when it was inconvenient or risky or complicated. The winter came, as Alaska winters do, with storms and cold and long dark nights. But this time, when the snow fell and the temperatures dropped, I knew my keys would stay where they belonged. I knew that if someone needed help, I could provide it without fighting through layers of bureaucratic nonsense. And I knew that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a community is for someone to stand up and say no when rules stop making sense, when authority becomes tyranny, when order becomes oppression. Brenda Hutchinson taught me that lesson, though probably not in the way she intended. And Mrs. Peterson reinforced it by being tough enough to survive until help arrived and gracious enough to forgive the system that had failed her. The story doesn't really have an ending because life doesn't work that way. The subdivision continued. The HOA continued, better managed but still imperfect. People moved in and out. Kids grew up. Winters came and went. But every time I see my Snowmachine keys hanging on their hook, I remember that night. The storm, the cold, the desperate struggle to do the right thing against someone who had forgotten that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. And I remember Mrs. Peterson's words. "You're a good man, Isaac. In the end, that's all any of us can try to be." Good neighbors, good people, willing to help when it's needed and brave enough to break a few rules when those rules stand between us and doing what's right. The snow falls every winter. The storms come. And in Mountain View Estates, we're ready for them now, together, the way a community should be.